Hoy estamos hablando de tiempo pretérito. If you want to reach conversational fluency in Espanol, mastering the preterite is key. But get this, knowing what particular ending to add to a stem of a verb isn't the real issue. It's really about knowing how and when you have to use the preterite tense in Espanol. In today's video, I'm going to show you a step-by-step strategy to make using the preterite tense in Spanish second nature. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what the preterite tense is, when to use the preterite tense, why you have to use it, how to form it, and if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll give you clues that will tip you off on knowing when to use the preterite tense every single time. And by the way, if you're joining me for the first time, soy Profe Don Omar, and I've been teaching people just like you for over 24 years on how to become better Spanish speakers. So let's get into what the preterite tense even is in Espanol. Entonces, la primera pregunta es, ¿qué es el pretérito? Principalmente usamos el pretérito para hablar de lo que pasó. We use the preterite tense to talk about what happened. Por ejemplo, I read a book. I went to the gym. I ate lunch in my car. These are all examples of things that already happened. In a nutshell, I want you to think about it like this: a completed action in the past. Gone are the days of where you have to look at a conjugation chart and try to figure out which ending should I add to a verb. The most important thing I want you to understand now is being able to understand the preterite tense, el pretérito, in contexto. What do I mean? I want you to baby step this thing. Learn the preterite in chunks. First, I want you to focus on one-on-one conversations. Entonces, la segunda pregunta que tenemos aquí es ¿cuándo lo uso? When do I use the preterite tense? Aquí tenemos ejemplos o información que necesitamos seguir. Las acciones terminadas. We're talking about actions that have ended or actions that have been completed. También vamos a usar el pretérito con los eventos específicos, with specific events that occurred in the past. They can fall in line as well here. También tenemos otros ejemplos. Por ejemplo, en español, ayer comí pizza. O, ¿qué comiste ayer? Yo necesito el pretérito para conversar o responder a una pregunta. Real quick, two things. I want to thank you personally for taking time to watch this video, but did you know that over 76% of people who watch the videos here on Speak Spanish Now are not subscribed? And there's a good chance that you could be one of them. So make sure you're subscribed so you catch all of the fun tips, the creative strategies, and easy to follow lessons. The second thing is that my Spanish Made Simple challenge is coming up very soon, and I want to make sure that you are a part of it. It's a 5-day challenge where I guide you through some of the basics of learning Spanish, key tactics and strategies I've used with my clients and students for over the last 24 years. But more importantly, I want to encourage you to register for the VIP experience, where we will spend an additional hour addressing specific questions you may have, as well as hands-on practice on how to properly listen, comprehend, and speak the language. So use the link below to get registered for the Spanish Made Simple Challenge, and I'll see you there. Now, let's get back to the rest of the video. Mira, the number one strategy to fully grasp the preterite is understanding it in context in a conversation. So you're probably asking, what do you mean? That's why we are solely addressing tú y una respuesta usando yo. We are focusing on questions that are being directed towards you and how you can respond talking about yourself. Start there first. Once you master the tú y yo exchange in una conversación, it makes it easier for you to progress to talking about other people down the road. So the first thing is I want you to focus first on one-on-one conversations. So let's take a look at the example that we previously had on the screen. We can consider this to be an A and B conversation. Notice how we have a question here. ¿Qué comiste ayer? We are focusing that question towards you. Notice that I put tú in paréntesis. Y tenemos la respuesta. Ayer comí pizza. And we have yo in parentheses. Now, eventually, once you get really good at listening for key words and being able to decipher if I need to use the yo form or the to form of the verb, you can remove those, because in Spanish, we don't have to have our subject pronouns like we do in English. So, podemos leer la pregunta como, ¿Qué comiste ayer? And me hearing comiste tips me off and lets me know they're addressing me with that question. Y también tenemos la respuesta. Ayer comí pizza. Once again, because you get really good at this, you'll start to know the yo form of comer is comí. So now you don't have to use your subject pronoun. You can if you want to, and it's good practice in the beginning that you do so. Ayer yo comí pizza, o ayer comí pizza. Es la misma cosa, no importa. It doesn't really matter. Eventually, you'll be able to take that yo out of your response, and you would also be able to take it out of your question in que comiste ayer, because we know you're in an A and B conversation. So I want you to fully grasp and master having a conversation between you and another person first, and then you can move on talking about he, she, we, they, y'all. Pero antes de continuar con el pretérito, before we continue with the preterite tense, there are trigger words or keywords that we have to make sure we listen for that will dictate I definitely need to use the preterite tense in my response to a question, or if I'm telling a story of some sort. These are the things that are going to tip us off. Ayer, anoche, esta mañana, esta noche. Those are things that tenemos que escuchar. We have to listen for. And then you want to think, okay, how would I respond listening and understanding those words are dictating I need to use the preterite tense? What is it that I'm going to say in a pretérito using some of these trigger words? You could use them in your responses, but they are also going to tip you off. Tengo que usar el pretérito simple. Ok, mira otro ejemplo de una conversación. Aquí tenemos la pregunta, ¿hablaste con tu mejor amigo esta mañana? Y una respuesta, no hablé con Pablo esta mañana. Notice how we understand that this conversation that's going on, the action is being directed towards me en la pregunta. Hablaste. Y también tenemos la palabra tú adentro de la pregunta. And we also have the word tú, kind of to tip you off right now. Notice that the tú form of hablar is hablaste en el pretérito simple. Y también tenemos la forma de yo. And we have the word yo in parentheses just to help you right now because we got training wheels on, right? And soon we'll be able to take those training wheels off and ride on our own. Y aquí tenemos la respuesta. No hablé con Pablo esta mañana. No, I didn't talk to Pablo this morning. But jot down the information that you see here, specifically the color-coded endings and how they are going along with either our verbos que terminan en er o los verbos que terminan en AR. So what's different about the two examples that we see on the screen in these two conversations? Entonces las terminaciones verbales son diferentes. Aquí tenemos los verbos que terminan con AR y aquí tenemos los verbos que terminan con ER. Tenemos que usar I, comí, comer, iste, comiste. Y cuando tenemos verbos que terminan con AR, vamos a usar aste, con la forma de tú, y en la forma de yo, o en la primera persona, when I'm talking about myself, yo tengo que usar hablé, o la terminación verbal, con hablé. AR verbs and ER verbs have different endings in el pretérito. But don't let that shake you up or rattle you. That's the same information we get con el tiempo presente, right? This is the same information we get with the present tense when we're starting to learn how to create sentences in español. They both have different endings anyway. So it's no different in el pretérito simple. The next thing is eventually you will recognize the subject of the conversation by the ending of the verb, which we've been saying from the beginning, right? La próxima cosa, piensa. Y la última cosa, responde. Listen, think, speak, right? You know how that old phrase goes, you need to think before you speak. Well, that's exactly what we have to apply here cuando estamos aprendiendo un nuevo tiempo. When we're learning a new tense, I want you to listen, think, speak, right? That's what we're doing here. And I want you to rep that activity as much as possible. So I want to make sure you're picking up what I'm putting down here. Aquí tenemos la pregunta, ¿por qué uso el pretérito? Why do I use the preterite tense? Talk about actions or events that are completed in the past, something that happened at a specific time, and then I need to know specifically when something started or ended ed, hint, hint, past tense. That's what I'm going to use at tiempo pretérito simple. So I want to hit you with a mini Profe power tip right here. Let's address a common mistake to avoid when you're starting out using and practicing using el pretérito. This is probably the number one question that people that are learning Spanish are always hit with, right? And a lot of times we freeze up because they don't game plan or they don't have an opening statement. Game plan, opening statement. I know you're probably like, what are you getting at? What is your point here? Piénsalo así. So from a sports standpoint, great coaches always create a plan that's going to place the team in the best position to perform or win the game. And from a legal standpoint, lawyers always prepare an opening statement that they're going to render to the judge or jury. So in other words, proper preparation prevents poor conversation. What do I mean by that? If you prepare a statement in advance to some of the popular questions that you may hear being asked to you or questions that you may want to ask somebody using el pretérito, always prepare in advance, siempre preparado. So let's practice. Entonces, dime en los comentarios una respuesta para esta pregunta. ¿Cómo aprendiste el español? How would you respond to that? Let me know in the comment section below. Y para mí, diría, lo aprendí en la escuela, la universidad y viviendo en países hispanohablantes. Entonces, ahora vamos a aprender en contexto. So we're going to continue learning in context about using el pretérito simple. Voy a leer un cuentecillo sobre mi día ayer y yo voy a incluir todas las formas de los verbos. All right, al final, si puedes usar el tiempo pretérito en tus conversaciones diarias. By the end of this story, you will be able to use the preterite tense in your daily conversations based on the practice that we're going to get here in contexto. Now, before we get into the actual cuentecillo, the short story, I want you to ask yourself these two important questions. What do I notice about ER and IR verbs? This is before we start the short story. Antes de empezar con el cuentecillo. Número dos. Am I paying attention to the pronunciation and accent marks the written accent marks that we see here? Los tildes. Pero antes de empezar con el cuentecillo, before we start with the short story, tenemos verbos que necesitamos saber. We need to make sure that we know el verbo hablar, comer, llamar, escribir, bailar, cantar y vivir. Y aquí tenemos the keys to this short story. Escucha, anota. Jot it down, right? Anota. Y también entiende. Understand what it is that's being conveyed in contexto. Ayer por la mañana hablé con mi hermana y comiste un sándwich en el parque por la tarde. Luego, él llamó a su mamá antes de la cena y escribió un mensaje para su amigo. Más tarde, bailamos en la fiesta. Por la noche en la fiesta, ellos cantaron una canción hermosa. Y al final del día, ellas vivieron una experiencia increíble. Let me know in the comments below how you did with that story in contexto. But our key takeaways here are, ¿conoces todas las terminaciones verbales? Do you know all of the verb endings now para los verbos que terminan con AR, ER, e IR? It's okay to rewind this and watch it until you get the notes down or until you get the idea or concept down en su mente. Y ahora es tu turno. ¿Puedes aplicar lo que aprendiste? Notice what I did with the directions right there. Can you apply what you've learned? So I've given you 6 statements here, and I want you to go through based on what we've talked about today and put in la forma correcta del verbo en el pretérito. And let me know how you did. Drop a comment below and give me your answers for what you came up with for número 1 a 6. Now, before we land the plane, I always like to leave you with a Profe power tip. And today's power tip is this. Build your vocabulary. Construye tu vocabulario. I want you to start with 3 to 5 words per week, all right? And what I mean by words, you want to talk about action words, verbs, right? So pick out 3 to 5 verbs that you're going to start with and build the different forms of the verb in el pretérito in contexto. Start game planning, start coming up with opening statements. How are you going to strategically use these verbs in context? That's the first thing. The next thing, after you get those 3 to 5 words, know those verbs, right? You want to move to telling your own stories, right? This is putting us in contexto, in context. And essentially, the more you practice, the better you're going to become at using el pretérito. Por ejemplo, podemos usar verbos como correr, escribir, viajar, right? That's an ER, IR, and an AR verb. You can practice with those and then build your list. And I would always try to get 3 to 5 that have different verb endings. AR verbs, ER verbs, IR verbs. Always pick one from each and then build those out. Trust me, the more you practice, the more natural it will become, the more natural it will feel. But you've got to put the practice in using these 3 verbs a week that you're working with. Siempre recuerda, practice makes improvement. Nobody says you're going to be perfect when you start doing this or even down the road. Practice makes improvement and repetition is key. So now that you have the basics of the preterite down, you may be wondering, so there are no irregular verbs in el pretérito? Pues sí, de hecho, hay muchos. Yes, we have a lot of irregular verbs in the preterite tense, but I just wanted to focus for now in getting you in the game by learning the regular preterite tense. And so now that you've accomplished that, you're now ready to move on to los verbos irregulares en el pretérito simple. So click right here where I introduce you to some of the more basic irregular verbs in el pretérito and a quick tactic that will have you using them like a pro in no time. Soy Profe Don Omar, your guide on how to speak Spanish now. Nos vemos.